What a great weekend. Friday night, we had 15,000 people from 500 plus churches worshiping God downtown Austin. And what an amazing time it was to celebrate Good Friday. And it was really a good one. But the reality is today is Sunday. It's Resurrection Sunday. And in my opinion, today is the most contentious day in all the Christian calendar. See, because here's the thing. Even if you are a completely atheistic, secular, non-believing individual or historian, you would be dumb to argue that Jesus Christ didn't live, right? That he wasn't on earth. I mean, it would be so hard to disprove the existence of Jesus Christ. I think of all historical figures, he probably is the most witnessed, most evidenced individual for all of history. So it isn't contentious to say that Jesus was on earth. You can have whatever faith, pure logic dictates that there was someone named Jesus on the planet. To say that he had died is not very contentious either, because everybody dies. I mean, it's not as if anybody's going to go, well, you say he died. He never died. No, everybody would believe that he died. But today is the contentious one, because what we're saying today is we're saying that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And that is contentious. I mean, that isn't just logically so. It isn't the normal case of events. It isn't what happens all the time. That is highly contentious, but that is what this day is about. And we've been journeying through the series these last couple of weeks around the greatest invitation. And today I want to speak about RSVP. RSVP. And if you're wondering what it stands for, it's the Responde s'il vous plaît, okay, which is an acronym for a French word that means respond, s'il vous plaît, which is please. Respond, please. Please, would you respond? Now, I'm sure you've seen this written on cards. Please RSVP. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever written that? I don't know what to say about that. Fact of the matter is, you're saying, please respond, please, okay, if you understand the French here. So you can't ask people to please RSVP. You can ask people to please respond, or you can ask them to RSVP, because please RSVP is saying, please respond, please, okay? So really, please RSVP, please. Well, I guess that works with my message today too. So please RSVP, okay? Please, double please. Okay, we really want you to respond. But here's the thing, we live in a world where this idea of response is an impossibility. The word respond means to react to something, it's to answer something, it's to reply to something, to acknowledge something, to counter something. That's what it means to respond to something. But the problem is we have too many things to respond to. I don't know if it's just me, but this is how many texts you send as Americans in this country. We collectively send, now I'd love for you to read that number. I made all of the rest zeros, if you'd forgive me for rounding it off. But it's 9,372,000,000,000 texts being sent every year. That's 94 texts per person per day. Now, some of you are looking and saying, I don't send that many. And then some of you are looking and saying, is that all? Have they no friends? And how could you just send 94 messages a day? Fact of the matter is, this is a lot of messages. This is just text messages. We're not talking about Instagram, Facebook, email, Twitter. We're not talking about television. We're not talking about billboards. We're not talking about people handing out flyers. We're not talking about lemonade stands in Zilker, where some churches are doing some crazy things. We're not talking about any of those messages. But how many messages do you receive on a daily basis? And if you had to RSVP, if you had to please respond to all those messages, it would be physically impossible. So what do? We learn to cope. How do we cope? Well, we cope by dividing messages into two categories. And we all do this. This is the coping mechanism. We divide it into these two categories. The one category is FYI. It's for your information. You don't have to respond. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to do anything. You're driving down the road and you're seeing a billboard and the billboard's advertising something. You're not responding to that. You're just letting it pass you by. You get that text message, you get that email. I mean, an email is the worst. Aren't email the worst? I mean, email is like rabbits. If you leave it in your inbox too long, they multiply. I mean, it just never ends. I mean, as soon as you've responded to one, 5 others show up. How does that work? Fact of the matter is that we've got all these messages, and eventually it just becomes FYI. Just another message. Come on by. Just pass me by. But every now and then a message comes by, and this isn't FYI, this is RSVP. And this is a message where you're going, listen, I'm not just going to take note of that. I'm not just going to let that pass me by. I've got to respond to this one. This is a good one. Between the hundreds and thousands of messages that you receive, this is one that you have to respond to. This is one that you've got to react to. And every single one of us needs to make up our mind whether Easter, Resurrection Sunday is FYI or RSVP. Every one of us has to make that decision. The message of this day that Jesus is risen. And then you want to respond, yes, He has. Indeed, He has. He has risen for me. It demands a response. The fact that we say that Jesus is risen, it demands a response. It demanded a response 2,000 years ago, and it demands a response this day. Easter isn't simply FYI. It's RSVP. Please, RSVP. Please, would you respond? Please, would you react? Please. Jesus dies and He's buried and He rises again and He appears and He's seen by many of the disciples of His day and they see Him and they respond to the fact that they see Him. But one guy doesn't see Him. His name is Thomas. For some reason, when 10 of the disciples saw Jesus, this one guy doesn't see Him. In John chapter 20, it says this. It says, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So this guy, Thomas, doesn't see Jesus. And to be honest with you, if you read his story, Thomas goes FYI. He goes, this whole resurrection deal, I don't buy it. I'll believe it when I see it, but for now, I don't buy it. I believe Jesus lived. I believe Jesus died. In fact, I was very closely connected with Him. I've experienced some things that He said, but the fact of the matter is, this is FYI. This information, I'm not going to believe it. And sometimes we respond that way to Easter. Maybe your response to this day is FYI, not because you haven't responded, but because it's just grown old. You're just going through the motions of just another Easter. And there's no response on your side. Maybe you feel a little out. You feel like other people are responding to this, or a family member dragged you along, or somebody brought you as a visitor, and you're going, listen, this really isn't my deal. This whole church responding to Jesus thing isn't me. I don't have anything against it, but it just isn't me. It's just for your information. It isn't RSVP. It just passes me by. It's interesting that this is the only place in the Bible where a certain little bit of information is given to us about Thomas. Every other place where Thomas is referenced, Thomas is simply referenced as Thomas. But this one place in the book of John, when John writes his epistle, he says, Thomas, also known as Didymus. And then he goes on to explain how he didn't believe. The word Didymus was another name that they gave. It was like a nickname given to Thomas, and it means the twin. One that is exactly alike. And maybe Thomas is your Didymus. Maybe you're struggling with the idea of believing all this. Because either this is true, and we should base our entire lives on it, or it isn't, and it doesn't matter at all. But it's nothing in between. So, this week I had a bit of a RSVP FYI moment, okay? So I love following the news, and I was actually in New York on Monday, and I had a meeting in a restaurant, and as I walked into the restaurant, all the screens in this restaurant had scenes up of the Notre Dame Cathedral that was on fire. It was busy burning down. And obviously I was interested. I know a little bit about the history of this, and I know all of that. And as I started reading about it, I was worried about some of the artifacts that was buried in it, that was vaulted in this particular space, because there's some Christian artifacts that is vaulted here. And I read about a priest that saved this particular artifact. Now, this artifact is believed to be the crown of thorns that was on Jesus' head, right? So, and what happened to this crown of thorns, it was in there, but it was rescued at the last minute. Now, right now, as I said that, some of you guys went, no, it isn't. And some of you went, I'm sure it is. And what makes that is your level of gullibility, right? Okay. Now, if you've got a high level of gullibility, that's okay. The word has been removed from the dictionary, so you've got nothing to worry about. But if you don't have a high level of gullibility, you might be thinking, how do they know? How do they know that this is the crown of thorns? So I went on a whole rabbit trail researching this, and I went, come on, hold on. If they saved this thing, why did they save this thing? Is this really it? Is this the crown of thorns that was on Jesus' head? And can thorns even survive this long? And how do they know that this was it? And it wasn't just somebody that strung together a crown of thorns. Now, this particular crown of thorns, just for interest's sake, for the one or two of you that actually worry about this, was the first mention in literature is in 409 AD, when it was the first time referenced in Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and there was a whole story written about how it was preserved and taken from when Jesus was buried. Somebody took it and they held on to it, and when he was resurrected, it became very valuable, and everybody looked after it. There's even some stories that for months and years afterwards, the thorns remained green, and how it would regenerate from time to time, and there's some very interesting literature about it. Fact of the matter is, in 1950, it gets taken away forcefully to Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, in the treasury there, and there's records of it being there. And then later, in about 1200 AD, what happens is this 11-year-old Baldwin II, he becomes the ruler of the Latin Empire, and he runs out of money. So what he has to do is he's got to borrow money, and what he does is he puts up these relics, these religious relics, up as collateral. And different nations would borrow him money for these collateral, and then eventually he runs out of the money he borrowed, and he goes to Louis XV in France, or the 14th in France, and he goes to Louis XIV, and he says, listen, I'm in trouble. I need somebody to help me out. And Louis XIV is not allowed to buy this relic from him, okay, because under the Catholic laws, it would be illegal to sell a relic. But what he does is he pays all his debt in exchange for becoming the guardian of the crown of thorns, okay? Little technicality there, right? It wasn't a sale, okay? Fact of the matter is, the price he paid was half of the yearly treasury of France, okay? So he didn't pay a little bit of money. He paid, in today's terms, billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars, okay, for this relic. And he was so excited about the fact that King Louis, when he brought it into the city, this king actually put on a linen garment, a plain white linen garment. He took off his shoes, which was totally unheard of for a king. He took off his own crown, and he walked into Paris bare feet, holding this crown himself, King Louis XIV. So convicted, so convinced was he that he was holding the crown of thorns of Jesus Christ. Now, French Revolution happens. It was at his chapel at the palace. A couple of years later, French Revolution happens. And then eventually, in the year 1806, it gets moved into the Notre Dame Cathedral, where every year, once a year, it gets displayed on Good Friday. Every year since 1806 until this year, when it wasn't. Now, some of you are sitting here thinking, okay, but was it really the crown on Jesus' head? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. But FYI, it's nice information. It's just FYI. See, let me explain. This will help, okay? Right here, I've got what we need to understand this, which is not going to work this way around. Let me fix it. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what I've got is I've got a hat, and I've got a little bunny rabbit, okay? And it's not a live bunny rabbit, and I must tell you that no actual bunnies were hurt in the process of doing what I'm about to do. And also, I need to tell you that this particular little bunny rabbit will remain safe and will not be in any distress. And there's no magic or occultic activity going on. In fact, I want to tell you that there might not even be any sleight of hand going on, okay? So just as a disclaimer, I'm not, this is just an illustration, right? It's a metaphor and a limited one at that. Is everybody comfortable with that? Okay? Now, I've been told that what I need is a magic wand, which I had somewhere, but I think oh yes. So what if I took Mr. Easter Bunny over here, right? And I took the Easter Bunny, and I put the Easter Bunny in the hat. And when I put the Easter Bunny in the hat, there's apparently a method to this. When I put the Easter Bunny to the hat, I said, bada bing, bada boom. And I told you that the Easter Bunny was now missing, okay? I made it disappear. That's where you go, ooh, wow. Okay, that didn't work, Easter Bunny. Is it not?
It's really not.
It's gone. Look at that. No Easter Bunny. Okay? So we made the Easter Bunny disappear. Now, right now, some of you are doubting Thomases right here in this room. You're looking at me like, no, it doesn't disappear. It's right in there. I tried this with a 5-year-old, and it didn't work earlier this morning. And I realized I'm dead in the water. Okay? But the fact of the matter is, each and every one of us look at this and you go, since this is simply FYI, it doesn't really matter. You don't really care whether or not I made the Easter Bunny disappear. But I want to quickly ask for a volunteer from the audience to quickly volunteer their wallet. Can anybody volunteer their wallet for a second? I need a wallet. Come on, give me a wallet. I need anybody's wallet. If it has a lot of money in it, that would be even better. So I've got a wallet. It's got a lot of money in it. And this wallet, I'm going to now do the same thing to. I'm going to make the wallet disappear. Bada bing, bada boom, gone. Now, for most of you, it's still FYI. Who cares that Carl lost his wallet? But Carl over here, he's RSVPing, okay? You can see him look at me like, come on, did he seriously take my... I'm sorry, buddy, it's gone. It's disappeared. The rabbit is eating it. The fact of the matter is that this is exactly what happened with the cross. See, when we think about the cross, it's easy for us to go, well, Jesus died, and when he died, he was resurrected, and we could simply look at it and say, hold on, but it's FYI. Who cares whether it happened or not? But it isn't simply FYI, because everything that Jesus said hung on this one moment. It was the moment that he would either just be another rabbi or he would be the Messiah. He would either just be another little someone that said something, or he really was the Son of God. And this moment, the resurrection moment, was the moment that everything hung on, that everything would make the difference between it just being FYI or RSVP. When you look at my hat, you're going, I don't really care. But this is far more than simply, I don't really care. And Thomas was in a space where he didn't believe. And if we continue reading his story, it says this in verse 25, it says, so the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. We've seen him. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe until I see for myself, I will not believe. See, Thomas sat at the table with Jesus the night before he was crucified. He partook of the bread and the wine. He was around that table when Jesus said, "This is my body broken for you." When Jesus said, "This is my blood spilled for you." When Jesus said that I am the bread of life, Thomas was in the room. He was around that table. He sat around that table when Jesus was as close to him that he could break a piece of bread and hand it to him, when he could see him and touch him and feel him and hear his voice. That's how close Thomas was to him. And now they're telling him that he died and he rose again, but he can't see him. And he said, "I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I'm looking at him, when I'm standing with him, when I can touch his hands and feel him. That's when I'll believe it. Show me, and I'll believe you." Some of you will believe me that the rabbit and the wallet is missing if you could inspect my hat. But you can't inspect my hat because it's a magic hat. You would believe me if you could come and see, you would believe it, but you're not going to believe it if you can't come and see. And interestingly, this was quite a dilemma, because we've got to remember who killed Jesus. Remember, Jesus was killed. There were these two groups of people. There was the Jewish leaders and the Romans. And both of those had motive to get rid of Jesus. The Jewish leaders had to get rid of Jesus. It was a big plus for them, because he was rallying up the people. And in fact, he was speaking against them. And the Romans wanted to get rid of Jesus. His death was a win for them, because people were crying out, "Hosanna, oh save us, King of the Jews." So it was good for them that he died, but now this rumor started circulating that he was alive. He is risen. This contentious Sunday came after what was a Good Friday in their book. The contentious Sunday started happening, and everybody was saying, "He's risen. He isn't dead anymore. He didn't stay dead. What he said was true." And when they said this was really bad for the Jewish leaders and the Romans. But here's the thing. If the Jewish leaders and the Romans wanted to disprove the rumors that Christ had risen, if they wanted to say, "Hold on a little, he isn't alive, he's dead, he didn't rise from the dead," all they had to do is they had to go to the tomb, and they had to go and find him, and they had to go and say, "Here he is." That's all they had to do. All they had to do was take his dead body and put it on display. End of rumor. I mean, the Roman government, with all of its might and all of its soldiers, had every reason to simply go and take him. And if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it was as simple as taking his body, putting it on display, and saying, "Here you go, here's your king that has risen from the dead." But they couldn't do that because there was no body. And if the Jewish leaders wanted to dispel it, all they had to do was go to the body and say, "Here's the body." But there was no body. The tomb was empty, because he is risen. He did rise from the dead, and I can't do magic. See, he was there. He rose from the dead, but he wasn't in the tomb. He wasn't there where they could find him and display his dead body. In fact, he would show himself to hundreds of people that would see him alive. And there are more accounts of him being alive than what we have accounts of many of the historical figures that everybody believes to be true. And when Jesus rose from the dead, he showed that he was who he said he was. But this was a very uncomfortable truth for the Romans and for the Jewish leaders. See, in fact, if you go and read the last couple of chapters before the cross, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, there's these three parables that Jesus tells in a row in the book of Matthew. And the third one of them we find in Matthew chapter 22. The first one is where he tells a parable of two sons. He says, a father asks two sons to go work in the vineyard. The one says, yes, I will, but he doesn't. And the other one says, no, I'm not going to, but he does. And he says, which is better? And what he's doing is he's speaking to these Jewish leaders, and he's saying, listen, guys, don't just say one thing but not really worship God. Rather worship God for real. And then he tells a story about a guy that leased out a vineyard and how he sends his servants back. And then the guys that were supposed to look after his vineyards would kill his servants and eventually his son. And then what he's doing is he's telling these Jewish leaders that although they tell everybody that we're God's people, we're God's elect, they're not responding to who he is. And then they keep on heckling him. And in chapter 22, he tells the third parable. And I want to read it to you. It says, Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, as they were not willing to come. Now, I need to interject here a little bit, because I think when we hear wedding, we're seeing white dresses, we're seeing the whole deal, something blue, something borrowed, something, I don't know, the whole thing. But anyways, we're seeing this whole thing as we know a wedding, but Jewish weddings were very different, right? The rhythm of the wedding was different. When you had the wedding feast, it was actually step 3 of the wedding. Step 1 of the wedding was a contract or a betrothal between the father of the bride and the bridegroom. And then when he had paid the bride price, step 2 of the wedding would be the consummation of the wedding, where there would be a smaller process with just the close family would be together with something, and that would kind of be where this would come together in a bigger way, and then they would be considered married from that point on. But when they married, step 3 in the marriage was this big festival where everybody and then some used to be invited, and all the family and friends came, and they celebrated what had happened. But in this particular case, that doesn't happen. They didn't want to come. Again, he sent out, verse 4, his other servants saying, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready. Come to the wedding. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. One paraphrase says they shrugged their shoulders and went their way. The wedding feast of the Lamb was going on, and they considered the information as FYI. This day can so easily pass us by in its magnitude. And the rest seized these servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard it, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burnt up their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the highways, and as many as you can find, invite to the wedding. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they could find, both bad and good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. So he said to him, friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, bind him hand and foot, take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Many are called, but few are chosen. Many are called, many are invited, but few are chosen. See, many were invited to this wedding feast. If you look at this in context, and I think this idea of being chosen has been misused in so many ways. But if you read this word within the context, the Greek word here, by the way, is ekletos, eklektos. And eklektos is the word that literally means to pick out the best. So it's two parts. It's the best and choosing out. So it's taking out the best or putting together the best. So many are invited, but only the best come together. Only those who come together are the best. Now, many have taken the scripture and says, well, God chooses. Everybody's invited to Jesus, but he handpicks who he likes. But I don't know about you, but that's not what this parable just said. I don't need to be a Greek scholar to understand that this parable just said everybody was invited, and he wasn't saying, and when everybody was in the hall, he picked out some and he left others. No, that's not what it said. It said he found one that wasn't clothed correctly, but most of them were welcome to the feast, both good and bad. And you've got to see this in context. What's happening here in context is Jesus is speaking to religious leaders that's been telling people that I've been chosen. You haven't. I'm sorry. I am God's elected. I am God's chosen. And you're a little subhuman to my greatness. And Jesus is telling them, listen, if you don't RSVP, I will find anyone and all who will RSVP, and whoever will RSVP, whoever will say, I want to be at this wedding, I will clothe them in righteousness. Not by their own righteousness will they make their way, but by the righteousness of the Son of God that died and rose again. By his righteousness, both good and bad will be at the wedding feast of the Lamb. Many are called, but few choose to respond. We can go one slide back. There's a paraphrase that takes this verse and it paraphrases it as follows. It says, for everyone is invited to enter in, but few respond in excellence. Few respond in excellence. Many are called. The resurrection of Jesus Christ wasn't for a select group. It was for all of humanity. But only some will respond to his invitation. Thomas was not responding to the invitation. In fact, Thomas was saying that this information is not for me to respond to until he did. And Jesus went and he found him. If you continue reading, verse 25, the disciples said, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks and I can put my finger where the nails were, I won't believe. Then verse 26 says, a week later, his disciples were in the house again and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be to you. Then he said to Thomas, and man, the room must have grown so quiet when he turned to Thomas and he said, put your finger right here. See my hands. Reach out your hand. Put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas responded to the resurrection of Jesus Christ as if it was FYI. And Jesus came and appeared to him and said, come and feel for yourself. Come and see for yourself. Why? Because his heart was that no one would doubt, but that all would believe. Stop doubting and believe. Then Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. I am blessed because I haven't seen, at least not in the sense that Thomas saw, but I have believed. I have responded. I have taken this day. I believe that Jesus Christ is who he says He is. I believe that He lived, I believe that He died, and I believe that He rose again on the third day. And I believe in His rising up. He rose from the dead for my sins, for my iniquities, for my mistakes. And now the same power that rose Jesus Christ from the dead is alive and well within me. I believe. Even though I haven't seen, and I am most blessed. I'm most blessed because even though I haven't physically seen like Thomas, I've experienced it and seen it, and I've experienced the effects of Him in my life, and I've experienced the guiltless weightlessness of sinlessness. I've experienced what happened in my own heart as I pray to God, and I get to experience Him and see Him and feel Him and see Him work and see Him operate in other people's lives. And in my own life, I've seen miracles and wonders. I believe that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. And I believe that His resurrection demands a response from every single one of us.